I wasn't looking for a bloodline. I was looking at a painting, a royal portrait from the 17th century, the kind you've seen 100 times in textbooks or on museum walls. The subject was a king, stiff in velvet and lace, his hand resting on a globe, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the frame. Standard stuff. Official, the kind of image that's meant to communicate power, stability, the natural order of things. And then I noticed the child, not the king's child, a small figure tucked into the background, half hidden in the shadow of a column, holding a staff that was too long for his body. No one in the official description mentioned him, no nameplate, no identifier. Just a face that seemed to be staring directly at the painter, as if he knew he shouldn't be there. I zoomed in. The staff had a serpent coiled around it. The child's eyes were pale, almost colorless. And on his collar, stitched in gold thread, was a symbol I had seen before. On a building in Washington, D.C., on a gate in Vienna, on the floor of a cathedral in Strasbourg. That was the moment the official story began to crack. Because once you start looking for that child, you find him everywhere. In every royal portrait. In every court painting from the 16th century onward. Always tucked to the side. Always holding that staff. Always wearing that symbol. And nobody, not a single art historian, not a single archive, has ever been able to tell me who he is. So I started digging. And the deeper I went, the more the official story fell apart. This is what I found. Let's start with what we're supposed to believe. The standard narrative of European royal portraiture is, on its surface, straightforward. From the Renaissance through the 19th century, kings, queens, emperors, and their courts commissioned paintings to project authority, wealth, and divine right. These were carefully staged images, every element chosen for symbolic meaning, the ermine trim for purity, the scepter for justice, the orb for dominion over the world. The artists were masters of their craft, and the patrons were meticulous about what was included. Nothing was accidental. A dog at the feet meant loyalty. A column meant strength. A curtain pulled back meant revelation of truth. Art historians have spent centuries decoding these symbols, and entire libraries have been written about the iconography of power. The child in the background, when he is acknowledged at all, is usually dismissed as a page, a servant, a minor court attendant, or sometimes a prince who died young, included posthumously as a gesture of remembrance. The staff with the serpent is called a caduceus, a classical symbol of commerce and medicine, borrowed from Greek mythology. The symbol on his collar is written off as a decorative monogram, or a heraldic badge with no surviving meaning. The textbooks say these details are trivial. They say we shouldn't read too much into them. They say the paintings are about the king and the rest is background noise. And for a long time I believed that. But then I started counting. The first crack came from a single painting in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. It's a portrait of Emperor Leopold I, painted around 1670 by an artist named Benjamin von Bloch. Leopold is in the center, wearing the Order of the Golden Fleece, his hand on a table covered in velvet. It's a perfectly conventional image, but in the lower left corner, almost cropped out of the frame, stands a boy. He's about 10 years old, dressed in black and white, holding a staff that rises above his head. The staff has a serpent wrapped around it, and the boy's expression is not the blank obedience of a servant. It's knowing, almost smug. I looked up the official catalog entry for the painting. It describes the boy as unidentified page. That's it. No name, no title, no explanation for why he's the only figure in the painting besides the emperor himself. I started cross-referencing other portraits from the same period. I found the same boy in a painting of Louis XIV at Versailles, tucked behind the throne, holding the same staff. I found him in a portrait of Charles II of England, standing at the edge of a balcony, his pale eyes catching the light. I found him in a painting of Peter the Great, in a portrait of Queen Christina of Sweden, in a family portrait of the Medici. Always the same staff, always the same symbol on the collar, always the same age, or at least always depicted as the same age, regardless of when the painting was made. The boy in the portrait of Leopold, I should have been 60 years old by the time the Charles II painting was finished. But he wasn't. He was still a child. And that's when I realized this isn't a person. It's a lineage, a bloodline. And someone has been placing them in royal portraits for centuries, right in plain sight. Then there's the matter of the symbol itself. I traced it backward through hundreds of paintings, engravings, and manuscripts. It appears on the collar of the boy in every portrait I could find, but it also appears in other places. On the base of a statue in the Tuileries Garden, on the keystone of an arch in Prague, on the binding of a book from the library of the Holy Roman Emperor R. Udolph II. The symbol is a circle with a dot in the center, crossed by a horizontal line and a vertical line, with a small hook on the lower right. It's not a letter from any alphabet I recognize. It's not a Christian cross, not a zodiac sign, not a heraldic charge. I sent it to a paleographer, someone who studies ancient writing systems. She says it resembled a form of shorthand used by certain monastic scribes in the early Middle Ages, but the hook was wrong. It didn't match any known script. She asked where I had found it. When I told her, she paused and said, "I've seen that mark before, on a reliquary in the Vatican archives." No one would tell me what it meant. That was the first time I understood that this wasn't just an art historical curiosity. This was a symbol that had been deliberately hidden in plain sight, carried by the same figure across centuries, across countries, across dynasties. And the fact that it appears in the Vatican archives, in a place where access is controlled, suggested that the bloodline was not just royal, it was sacred, or at least it was treated as sacred by those who controlled the records. Consider the portrait of Infanta Maria Teresa of Spain, painted by Diego Velázquez in 1653. It's a stunning work. The Infanta's dress is a cascade of silver and pearl. Her hair is swept up in ribbons. Her face is pale and serious. She was about 15 at the time, and the painting was meant to be sent to potential suitors across Europe. In the background, through an open door, you can see a courtyard, and in that courtyard, standing alone, is the boy. He's small, almost lost in the perspective, but the staff is unmistakable. Velázquez was a master of composition. Nothing in his paintings is accidental. The boy is placed exactly at the vanishing point of the painting, the point where the viewer's eye naturally rests. He is the structural center of the image, even though he is not the subject. Art historians have noted this, but they call it a compositional device. They say the boy is there to create depth. But if that were true, why is he in every painting? Why does he appear in the same position with the same props, in the work of artists who never met each other, who worked in different courts, different countries, different centuries? The only explanation that fits is that he was not a choice made by the artist. He was a requirement, a condition of the commission. You want to paint the king? Fine, but you must include the child, you must include the staff, you must include the symbol. And you must never ever explain who he is. And then I found the records for a portrait of Frederick the Great of Prussia, painted by Antoine Pes in 1736. Frederick is shown in armor, holding a baton, standing before a battlefield. The official history says that Pesne was the court painter and that Frederick was a young crown prince at the time. But in the lower right corner of the painting, barely visible in the shadow of a cannon, is the boy. He's holding the staff, and his eyes are fixed on Frederick. I went to the Prussian State Archives in Berlin, or at least I accessed their digitized catalog, looking for any mention of this figure. I found a letter from 1735 written by Frederick's father, King Frederick William I, to his agent in Paris. In the letter, the king instructs the agent to secure the services of a painter who understands the requirements of the court. The phrase is underlined, the requirements. I found another letter from the same king to the painter himself, saying that the figure must be included and the symbol must be in gold thread, and the child must be painted as if he is looking at the prince, not at the viewer. The painter responded, in a letter that survives only in a fragment, "I understand the tradition. It will be done." The tradition, not a request, not a preference, a tradition. Something that had been done for so long that it required no explanation, and yet no one has ever written down what that tradition meant. The letters are in the archive. They are real. They are dated. And they are almost never cited in any biography of Frederick the Great. Why? Because acknowledging them would raise the question that no one wants to answer: what tradition? Who started it? And why does it continue, painting after painting, century after century, without a single official explanation? Here is where it becomes difficult to explain. I started looking at portraits from outside Europe. I found the boy in a Mughal miniature from the court of Shah Jahan, painted around 1640. The miniature shows the emperor receiving ambassadors, and in the background, behind a screen of marble latticework, is the same figure, the same staff, the same symbol on the collar, the same pale eyes. The artist was a Hindu working in a Muslim court, in a completely different visual tradition. How did he know to include that figure? I found the boy in a Chinese scroll painting from the Qianlong era, dated 1765. The scroll shows the emperor on a hunting expedition, and in a grove of trees, partially obscured by foliage, is the child. The staff has been rendered as a bamboo pole with a serpent carved into it, but the symbol on the collar is identical. I found him in a portrait of an Ottoman sultan, in a painting of a Russian czar, in a lithograph of an Ethiopian emperor, the same figure, the same staff, the same symbol, across cultures, across religions, across continents. Either this is the most extraordinary coincidence in human history, or there is a bloodline that has been present at every center of power for at least 500 years, and someone has been documenting their presence in the most public way imaginable. By pi, entering them into the official record. Let's look at the staff more closely. The caduceus, as it's commonly called, is usually associated with Hermes, the Greek messenger god, and with the modern medical profession. But the staff in these portraits is not the classical caduceus. The classical caduceus has two serpents intertwined with wings at the top. The staff in these portraits has a single serpent, and there are no wings. It's closer to the staff of Asclepius, the god of healing, which also has a single serpent. But Asclepius's staff is a rough wooden branch, and the staff in the portraits is smooth, polished, almost metallic. And the serpent is always depicted in a specific posture, coiled 3 times, with its head raised at a 45-degree angle, as if it is about to strike. I found a reference to this exact configuration in a medieval alchemical text, the Splendor Solis, dated to 1532. The text describes a staff called the Rod of the Ancestors, which is said to be passed down through a single family, a family that stands behind the thrones of the world. The text is illustrated with a woodcut showing a child holding a staff with a single serpent, coiled 3 times, head raised. The child is wearing a collar with the same symbol. The Splendor Solis is in the British Library. It is not a secret. It is not a forbidden text. It is simply ignored. Because if you take it seriously, you have to ask, who are the ancestors, and why does their rod appear in every royal portrait for the next 300 years? But the anomaly that broke the pattern for me was not a painting. It was a photograph. In 1865, the studio of Rodolphe Eugène d'Esterre in Paris produced a series of carte de visite portraits of Napoleon III, the Emperor of the French. These were mass-produced photographs, sold to the public, the 19th century equivalent of a presidential portrait. In one of them, Napoleon is seated at a desk, his hand on a document. Behind him, partially obscured by a curtain, is a child. He is about 10 years old. He is holding a staff. The symbol on is visible in the high-resolution scan. This is not a painting. This is a photograph, a direct imprint of light on a chemical plate. The child was there in the studio in 1865, standing behind the Emperor of France. And yet no record of that child exists, no census, no birth certificate, no school enrollment, no marriage record, no death certificate. He appears in the photograph and then vanishes from every document in the empire. d'Esterre's studio logs, which survive in the French National Archives, list the names of everyone who was present for the sitting, the emperor, his secretary, a valet, a maid, and the photographer himself. No child. The logs say that the photograph was taken in a single exposure, with no retouching, and yet the child is there. How? The child is there, in the photograph, and the official record says he cannot be. There are only 2 possibilities. Either the child was physically present and his existence was deliberately erased from every document, or the photograph was altered after the fact. But d'Esterre's studio logs explicitly state no retouching. And the quality of the image, the way the light falls across the child's face, the way his shadow falls on the curtain behind him, this is consistent with a single exposure, not a composite. I took the high-resolution scan to a forensic imaging specialist, a man who has worked on authentication cases for museums. He told me that the child's presence in the photograph is optically consistent with the rest of the image. The depth of field, the grain, the density of the silver halide, all of it matches. He said, and I quote, "If this is a fake, it was done by someone with technology that did not exist in 1865. So we are left with the first possibility. The child was there and his existence was erased. But why and by whom? And how many other photographs from how many other eras contain the same ghost?" I started looking at photographs of state funerals. In 1881, the funeral of President James A. Garfield drew massive crowds in Washington, D.C. Photographers documented the procession, the dignitaries, the casket. In one image, taken by the firm of Brady and Handy, there is a cluster of children near the front of the crowd. Most of them are dressed in ordinary clothes, but one child stands apart. He is wearing a dark coat with a high collar, and on that collar, barely visible in the shadow of his chin, is the symbol. He's not looking at the casket. He is looking directly at the camera. The staff is not visible, but his right hand is clenched at his side, as if holding something that has been cropped out of the frame. I checked the original glass plate negative, which is held by the Library of Congress. The plate is intact, no cropping. The staff is simply not there, but the hand is clenched and the posture is identical to every other portrait I had seen. The child is there at the funeral of a president watching, and no one knows who he is. Then there is the case of the coronation portrait of King Edward VII of the United Kingdom, painted by Laurits Tuxen in 1903. The painting is enormous, nearly 10 feet tall, and it hangs in Buckingham Palace. It shows the king in his coronation robes, seated on the throne with the crown and scepter. In the background, to the left of the throne, there is a doorway. In the doorway, partially obscured by the shadow of the doorframe, is a child. He is about 12 years old. He is holding a staff. The symbol on his collar is clear. The official catalog of the painting describes the figures in the background as courtiers and attendants. It does not mention the child. I found a letter from Tuxen to his wife, written during the painting's commission, in which he says, "I have been given instructions regarding the figure in the doorway. I am not to paint his face too clearly. He is to be a suggestion, not a portrait." A suggestion, not a portrait. The king's own court painter was told to obscure the child's identity. Why? Because the child was not supposed to be identifiable. He was supposed to be a symbol, a presence, a reminder of something that everyone in the room understood and no one spoke aloud. But consider this, the symbol on the collar, the one that appears in every portrait, is not a random design. It is a specific geometric pattern. A circle with a central dot surrounded by 3 smaller circles arranged in a triangle. I found this exact symbol in a manuscript from the Library of the Vatican dated to 1471. The manuscript is a treatise on the lineages of European nobility, and it contains a diagram of what it calls the sacred bloodline, a family that is said to have intermarried with every royal house in Europe for centuries. The symbol is used to mark the members of this family in the diagram. The manuscript is not classified, it is not hidden. It is simply never cited in mainstream genealogical studies. The Vatican's catalog describes it as a work of speculative history, of no known factual basis. But the symbol in that manuscript is identical to the symbol on the collars of the children in the portraits. And the manuscript was written in 1471, 2 centuries before the earliest portrait I had found. So the symbol predates the paintings. The tradition predates the paintings. And the tradition is about a bloodline, a family that stands behind the thrones, invisible to history, but present in every official image. I began to wonder, if this bloodline is real, how do they maintain their secrecy? How do they ensure that every painter, every photographer, every court official knows to include the child, but never to explain him? The answer, I believe, lies in the nature of the portraits themselves. They are not accidental. They are not eccentricities. They are instructions. The child is a visual signature, a mark of authenticity, a way of signaling to those who know what to look for, that this ruler is legitimate, that this throne is sanctioned by the bloodline. The child is the seal, and the staff is the authority. The ruler holds the scepter of temporal power. The child holds the rod of the ancestors. The ruler reigns. The child endures. The ruler dies. The child moves on to the next court, the next throne, the next portrait. The child is eternal. But here is where the theory becomes unsettling. If the child is a member of a bloodline that has been present at every center of power for 500 years, then that bloodline is not just a family. It is a shadow government, a network of influence that transcends nations, religions, and empires. And if they have been documenting their presence in the most public way imaginable, by painting themselves into the official record, then they are not hiding. They are showing themselves openly in plain sight, confident that no one will see. Because the child is always in the background. The child is always small. The child is always easy to dismiss as a servant, a page, a random bystander. And the staff is always disguised as a walking stick, a scepter, a toy. The symbol is always on the collar, a piece of jewelry that could be anything. The bloodline is hiding in plain sight, and the official history has never once asked why. I found a portrait of Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Alice, painted by Franz Xaver Winterhalter in 1864. The princess is shown in a white dress, standing in a garden. In the background behind a hedge is a child. He is holding a staff. The symbol on his collar is visible. The painting is in the royal collection, and the official description says the child is a gardener's boy. A gardener's boy. Who wears a gold collar with a geometric symbol? Who stands perfectly still, holding a staff while a princess is painted? The description is absurd, and yet it is accepted. Because the alternative is too strange to consider. The alternative is that the child is not a gardener's boy. The alternative is that the child is a member of the bloodline, present at the court of Queen Victoria, watching over her daughter, recording the moment for reasons we cannot fathom. And then I found the portrait that broke me. It is a painting of the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which ended the American Revolutionary War. The painting was done by Benjamin West, but it was never finished. West intended to include the American commissioners, but the British commissioners refused to sit for him, so the painting remains a fragment. In the background of the unfinished painting there is a doorway. In the doorway there is a child. He is holding a staff. The symbol on his collar is clear. The painting is in the collection of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. The official catalog describes the child as an unidentified figure, possibly a page. A page. At the signing of the treaty that created the United States, a child standing in the doorway watching the birth of a nation, and no one has ever asked who he was. So let us step back and connect the dots. The official story says that these children are servants, pages, gardeners' boys, random bystanders. The official story says that the staff is a walking stick, a toy, a prop. The official story says that the symbol is a decorative motif, a piece of jewelry, a coincidence. But the official story has never explained why the same child appears in the same posture, with the same staff, with the same symbol, in painting after painting, in photograph after photograph, across centuries and continents. The official story has never explained why the painters were instructed to include the child, but never to paint his face clearly. The official story has never explained why the Vatican manuscript from 1471 contains the same symbol, linked to a bloodline that intermarried with every royal house. The official story has never explained why the child appears in a photograph of Napoleon III, with no record of his existence. The official story has never explained why the child is present at the funeral of a president, at the coronation of a king, at the signing of a treaty. The official story has never explained any of this, because the official story is not an explanation. It is an erasure. What if the bloodline is real? What if there is a family, a network, a shadow government that has been present at every center of power for 500 years? What if their presence is documented in the most public way imaginable, in the paintings and photographs that hang in the great halls of the world? What if the children are not children at all, but members of a lineage that does not age, that does not die, that simply moves from court to court, throne to throne, watching and waiting? What if the staff is not a staff, but a key, a symbol of authority that predates the crowns and scepters of Europe? What if the symbol on the collar is not a decoration, but a mark of membership, a brand that identifies the bearer as part of the bloodline? What if the official history has been telling us the truth all along, but only in the background, in the shadows, in the figures that no one is supposed to notice? And what if the bloodline is still here? What if the children are still being painted, still being photographed, still standing in the background of every official image, watching? What if you have seen them yourself, in a portrait in a museum, in a photograph in a history book, in a news broadcast, and you never noticed? What if the child is looking at you right now, from a painting you have walked past 100 times, and you have never once asked why he is there? Who are they? Why do they hide it in plain sight? Why do they document their own presence, generation after generation, century after century, if they never intend to be seen? And what happens when we finally see them?